Welcome back, Traveler, to the third and final part of the Invocation Academy review session for version 4.3. We finally reached the last of the new content, the 6 other character cards. In case you missed the last few sessions, you can catch up on the balance changes and early impressions of the 20 new action cards in part 1, and the 5 new monster cards in part 2. As for today, we'll be looking at the last 6 character cards, going in depth on their full kit, give you my impressions so far, and provide you with a deck suggestion or 2 if you want to try them out. So without further ado, let's start the show, and who better to do that than Linny. Linny's skill does 3 pyro damage, but will use up any stacks of prop surplus he has, which is his main mechanic. For each stack used, he deals 1 additional damage and also heals 1 HP. He gains these stacks with his 2 other skills. The first is a secondary normal attack, which costs 3 pyro die. Dealing 2 damage on hit, it also leaves behind a summon that does 1 pyro damage with 1 usage. The summon can stack additional usages as well, but only up to a max of 2. This attack adds 1 stack of prop surplus, but if Linny is at 6 or more HP, he will take 1 point of piercing damage. Of course, because of the stack he receives, the piercing damage does eventually cancel out when he heals his HP using his skill, so overall you don't actually take additional damage. So the best way to think of this skill simply is a 2 damage skill that leaves behind a 1 damage summon, while also adding another 1 delayed damage later, which altogether is pretty powerful. His talent uses the attack, and while equipped, any damage done by Linny or the summon will deal additional 2 damage to a character already affected by pyro. While you are wasting the elemental application, plus 2 damage on any attack is quite a lot. You also double dip with his summon, since your initial hit is buffed by plus 2 and the damage of the summon as well. If you start off using the talent into a skill, by himself Linny is already doing 10 damage for just 6 dice, turning him into a really strong solo character. But if you are using him more for his elemental application utility, you can consider leaving this out. The other way Linny gains prop surplus stacks is with his burst, which is really similar to his secondary attack. It costs 3 pyro and 2 energy, deals 3 pyro damage initially, also creates the summon, and adds a stack of prop surplus. The burst though doesn't deal any damage to yourself, so it will net you plus 1 HP later on. Linny's main strength is definitely with his secondary normal attack. Once you use up that prop surplus stack, you're essentially getting a 4 damage skill out of the deal with multiple elemental applications. And if you ever happen to use it while you're below 6 HP, it generates even more value. To top it off, the piercing damage isn't even always a downside, as it's a great way to trigger artifacts like Vorukasha that was recently added as well, and combine nicely with other healing. One thing to watch out for, while the normal attack looks like a skill, it is considered a normal attack similar to Ganyu. So the way you buff it is by cards that care about normal attacks like Heavy Strike. Do note, however, that a lot of cards that discount normal attacks like Northern Smoked Chicken only take off unaligned die and will not work on this skill. Linny is our first pyro character that has an on-hit skill that leaves behind a summon, a combination which has always been very strong. Because of that, you can pretty much play him in any deck that really benefits from lots of pyro application, so for example, Linny, Thunder Manifestation, Bennett. This is very similar to the Klee variant I showcased not too long ago, but Thunder Manifestation really likes to combine with a summon character over others, making Linny a great choice over Klee. You have a little bit less upfront damage too, but that means you're less likely to overkill characters in that first turn or when you use Pyro Resonance. Definitely give this one a try. And what's this? Linny disappeared, and in his place, it's our next character, Lynette. Lynette's skill deals 3 Anemo damage, and if she's at 9 or more HP, nothing else happens, but if she uses this at 8 or lower, she'll immediately heal 2 HP, but if that happens, she attaches a status to herself that will end up dealing 2 piercing damage to herself at the end of the round if she happens to be at 6 or more HP. Note that this can only happen once a round. What the skill essentially means is if you use it and heal, and you take enough damage before the round ends, then the skill does heal for 2 HP for free. Otherwise, it just acts like a normal 3 damage skill. Her talent uses her skill, and while it doesn't do anything for the first usage, the second time Lynette uses the skill in a round, it will not only add plus 2 damage, but force the opponent to their character on the left, similar to Sucrose. So normally this talent card would be pretty conditional and not worth playing, but it actually lends itself quite well to how you tend to use Lynette as a finishing anchor character. In these situations, being able to buff damage like this is pretty important, so this can actually be worth playing. I wouldn't include this in every Lynette deck, but as you'll see later, this one will make an appearance in the suggested list. Her burst costs 3 Anemo and 2 energy, dealing 2 damage and leaving behind a 2-use summon that does 1 Anemo damage. While active also, once a round it will reduce incoming damage to your active character by 1. Like other Nemo summons, this one can also infuse an element, but rather than triggering when a swirl happens, this one actually infuses when you take elemental damage instead, which is pretty neat. On the surface, Lynette's skills look a little underwhelming. While her skill does heal her, it's fairly easy to play around for your opponent, and you'll often end up taking that 2 damage anyway at the end of the round, negating the healing. However, if you can ensure that she does take enough damage by the end of the round, her skill essentially has a lucky dog built into it, which is extremely powerful. But how do you get that to happen? Well, the best way is to make Lynette the anchor for your deck. This is the character that you plan to keep alive last and end your game on. If you think about it, if you and your opponent are both down to 1 character, there's no way for them to play around that heal. They're forced to attack Lynette, and you might get away with 2 healing for free, easily outpacing them in a one-on-one fight. On top of that, this combines great with other defensive cards like Tenacity or Aquila Favonia. And one of the best ways you can leverage that right now is actually with double Anemo Stall with Dea and Jean. Jean's always been in a strange spot as double Anemo decks tend to have played pretty aggressively, but it's finally time for her to shine. Dea 2, of course, is also a great defensive option that really allows you to take advantage of Jean's heal, but you can switch her out with any summon character that you like. The plan for the deck is pretty simple. You're stalling the game out early on with Dea and Jean, building up to Jean's burst, all the while triggering swirls and dealing damage to your opponent. During this time, you're gearing up Lynette and hopefully get them down to 1 character facing off against Lynette, who should easily be able to outvalue the other character between her heals and equipment. And another deck you could even try is the brother-sister combo Linny Lynette in the same double Anemo deck. Linny's self-damage here also plays nicely to give you extra value from Jean's burst, and additionally, since both of them are Fatui, you actually can run Fatui Resonance in here to really give your swells an extra punch, assuming you don't low roll the Pyro one, of course. If you've always wanted to play a slower double Anemo deck, then definitely give Lynette a try. And that concludes our magic show. Next up is a dog show. It's Goro. Goro's kit revolves around his General's War Banner status, which when active causes all your characters to deal +1 geo damage and can stack up to a max of 3 rounds. Note that since it does specify characters, this doesn't buff summon damage. His skill deals 2 geo damage and adds 2 usages to his banner. His talent uses his skill, and while equipped, once a round when a character deals geo damage with the banner active, you draw a card. While it's a decent effect, with the new cards that have come in, we have a lot of card draw options that are a little bit less conditional. Only drawing cards if the War Banner is active is a pretty big downside, as you're not always going to have it up. Better to bury this one. His burst costs 3 geo and 2 energy, also dealing 2 damage and adding 2 usages to the banner, so similar to his skill. It will also leave behind a 2 usage summon that deals 1 geo damage at the end of the round. Additionally, if your party contains 2 geo characters, it will also generate a crystallized shield. Out of all the new characters, Goro is the most straightforward. Everything about him is telling you to play him in double geo, and that's certainly what you should do. If you remember when we discussed Ito's nerfs and how important it was dropping his damage from 6 to 5 per hit, well, now the banner lets you bring those attacks back up to 6. However, rather than Ito here, you would much rather be playing with Noelle instead, along with Dea. With the banner up and Noelle equipped with a weapon, you're back to doing 6 damage per hit, which is a really important breakpoint. And while you're gearing her up, you can delay the game quite effectively between using Dea's skill and Goro's burst to provide a lot of crystallized value. While certainly not as powerful as pre-nerf Ito, it's definitely a great upgrade for Noelle decks and definitely worth trying if you like double geo. Alright, we're halfway through. Hope you're still awake. Well, our next character certainly isn't. We have Layla. Layla's skill gives 2 shield and sets up the shooting star status, which is the main focus of her kit. When any character uses a skill while this is active, you'll accumulate 1 star. When you reach 4 or more stars, you'll immediately consume 4 of these stacks to deal 1 cryo damage. And if you use the skill again after the first time, you'll now generate an additional 2 stars on top of the 1 you get for casting the skill, for a total of 3. And similar to Nilo's buff, this doesn't go away even if Layla is taken out and will last for the rest of the game. Her talent card uses her skill, and while equipped will draw a card every time the star does damage. Similar to Goro though, there's a lot better card draw options, and Layla's talent especially takes quite a while before it fires, and is simply a long time to wait to get cards. Also, one of the strengths of the status is that it sticks around even after Layla goes down, but for her talent to work, she needs to stay alive. So best put this to sleep and not play it. Her burst deals 3 cryo damage and leaves a summon that deals 1 cryo damage with 2 usages. And if the status is active, will also accumulate an additional star each time it hits. Layla is extremely slow to get going, but because her skill sticks around forever, it has the potential really to generate a lot of value if you can drag out the game, so of course, she is perfect in stall decks. If you're playing Layla, you almost always want a skill as the very first thing each game so you can build those stacks up as early as possible. And after that, even if Layla goes down, you still have that status, so you'll never lose out on your elemental application. Being able to control the timing of it as well, unlike summons, is actually pretty relevant and quite strong and can force your opponent into awkward situations, trying to play around freeze in particular. So if you want to give that a try, I'd recommend Layla, Barbara, Childe. If stalling is what you want to do, Barbara is of course perfect, as is Double Hydro. You can use that time to set up Childe with great single target combo damage and hopefully sweep your opponents in one or several rounds while messing with their plan with freeze. It's a pretty difficult deck to play, but very fun. You can also try her with Double Geo with Noelle and Goro. This plays similarly to Dehya, but is even more defensive. The additional damage Layla provides can also be quite nice to finish off enemies unexpectedly. And next up, silently reading in the corner waiting his turn, is Alhaitham. His skill deals 2 Dendro damage and adds 2 stacks of Chisel Light Mirror status up to a max of 3. While he has the status active, his attacks will be converted to Dendro and additionally deals 1 Dendro damage as a separate follow-up. If this is a charged attack, it also adds another round to the status. Yep, once you get this going, you can keep stacking this forever to permanently infuse his attacks. His burst costs 3 Dendro and 2 energy, dealing 4 Dendro damage as its base, but adds bonus damage for each mirror stack that he currently has, so potentially up to 7 damage. Also, after using the burst, he'll gain back mirror stacks based on how many stacks were used to power the burst. The easiest way to remember is that the number of stacks you're refunded is 3 minus the number of stacks that you use. So if you used 0 and did 4 damage, then you get a full 3 stacks back, but if you used up 3 dealing 7 damage, then you get none back. Trust Alhaitham to have a kit that requires math. His talent card uses his burst, and when equipped, whenever the burst is buffed with at least 1 mirror, will draw a card and will always refund 3 mirror stacks instead of using the normal formula. But since he can pretty easily restack his mirrors with any number of charge attacks, it's really not that important for the burst to do this, so it's not really worth using. Alhaitham has the highest amount of potential Dendro application of any character. In fact, it's almost too much and really difficult to make the full use out of both hits of his infused normal. But even if you're wasting those elemental applications, having that extra damage just adds up super fast, particularly if you're playing him with Quicken, which is the best reaction to make use of his kit. And on top of that, the burst is very efficient at dealing damage, and you have a pretty nice sequence using his skill into a charged attack and then bursting for quite a lot of damage. One character that is able to keep up with the Dendro application is Beidou. So I want to try this deck with Cyno as the third character. The idea here is pretty simple. You want to rush for Beidou's burst and then just start hitting them with Alhaitham. Once set up, each hit will trigger Quicken, and then both Quicken stacks are perfectly used up with those 2 Dendro hits of Alhaitham's attack, only to trigger Quicken immediately once Beidou's burst hits. And you do it all over again. With this setup, you're doing 7 damage with every attack, plus it's split into multiple hits, which makes it less likely to overkill. And if your opponent happens to survive all of that, then Cyno is great at cleaning up. And finally, our last character here to tie up all the loose ends, Yelan. Yelan's main mechanic is Breakthrough, which is a status that she gets at the start of the game starting at 1 stack, and gains 1 stack naturally at the end of each round, up to a max of 3. Anytime she attacks with 2 or more of these stacks, then 2 of them are used up, converting her normal attack to Hydro damage and also drawing an extra card. Her skill does 3 Hydro damage and adds 2 Breakthrough stacks immediately. Her talent uses her skill and doesn't buff it directly, but when equipped will ensure that you roll 1 Omni die for each different element type in your party, which means a max of 3. It's super interesting to have a talent card that fixes dice instead of augmenting attacks, but without getting too deep into the topic, dice fixing that fixes your rolls generally isn't as good as it looks. There's a reason you still don't see Jade Chamber play very much despite costing 0. The talent is definitely better than that, but probably not enough to be running, particularly because Yelan doesn't really like to be run in Rainbow decks. But if you do happen to have a deck with 3 elements, you can consider it, but I wouldn't recommend it. Her burst costs 3 Hydro and 3 energy, dealing 1 Hydro damage initially, and deals 2 Hydro damage every time a character uses a normal attack for the next 2 rounds, very similar to Xingqiu's burst. With her passive, Yelan has a lot of Hydro application potential and works quite well in any deck that can make use of that. When playing her, you generally want to be alternating between an attack and skill, or you can just keep her on standby, building up those stacks naturally, and then using an attack to trigger a reaction and maybe draw a card. Her burst also, of course, has a lot of combo potential, just like other bursts of the same variety like Yoimiya or Beidou. But of course, at 3 energy, it does take quite a while to build up, but luckily her skill and normal attack are great at generating energy, while also providing some value and drawing cards. Since her passive does build up over time, she does slightly better in slower decks, allowing you to make more use of it and draw more cards. So overall, Yelan plays very nicely in double Hydro freeze deck, so why not try Yelan, Ayaka, Mona? Early on, your goal should be to try and set up Yeelan's burst, but also with the option of using Mona and quick swapping to Ayaka to freeze your opponents when it really matters. Once you've built up Yeelan's burst, then you can combine that with Ayaka's infused normal attacks to repeatedly trigger freeze on your opponents. And unlike similar strategies that used to use Xingqiu, you're not limited this time to just 3 attacks, so you have the ability to not only combo your opponent in the current round when you use the burst, but into the next round as well, potentially shutting them out for 2 whole rounds. On top of that, Yeelan actually holds her own very well, and she'll soften up the opponents quite a bit while building up to a burst, making it much easier to one-turn kill with Ayaka later. And that is it. We are finally done with every new card in version 4.3. While huge updates like this are exciting, they're definitely very tiring, but hopefully you have a better grasp now of all the new cards and feel more confident heading into your co-op matches. If you are a newer player, be sure to attend the TCG 101 series to level up your Genius Invocation game. If there's anything you'd like to see in an upcoming video, drop a comment and I'll see how I can help. Be sure to enroll in our courses by subscribing so you can be notified when a new lesson's available. Until then, class dismissed!